We've got our SEC post-spring rankings. Who are we high on coming out of the spring?
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Chris Gordy. This is Locked On SEC. On today's show, we will get into some of the takeaways happening over at the ACC meetings, as there's a lot of reports about who and what is still trending towards that 2014 playoff. We'll get to that coming up in segment 3. Also, segment 2, we heard from Steve Sarkisian taking some shots at Ole Miss a couple days ago, but there was actually some other really good stuff that Steve Sarkisian said in the sit-down interview, particularly in scolding the College Football Playoff Committee. So we'll get to that. But first, we're going to start today with our SEC 2026 post-spring rankings. So, look, we had a lot of people do it, and I kind of sat back and waited. So let me kind of assess and see, looking back at the teams and kind of reflecting on, all right, what did these teams bring in? What did they, what was the kind of the contingent on this team coming out of the spring and their new pieces and how well they're adapting, and also, some things to consider where, at an LSU, we barely saw Sam Leavitt coming off his injury. Health is going to be a big thing with them. Arch Manning, very limited throughout the spring after his surgery, not getting to do much. So, there's just a lot of little pieces here and there that go into assessing this thing. But I thought we would take a look at our SEC post-spring rankings. Again, this is from Locked On SEC. And starting off at number 1, we've got Texas. And look, typically the last few years, I've gone with Georgia as my top team coming out of, spring ball, or at least, going into the season. And I couldn't do it with Georgia, despite bringing Gunnar Stockton back, despite having all these different pieces on defense. I just looked at what Texas did. And again, I was high on Arch Manning last year. He got better as the year went along. But adding Will Muschamp as a defensive coordinator, so making that defense a little bit more aggressive this year. And you bring in a guy like Cam Coleman, you redo the entire backfield. That's what's so impressive, that Steve Sarkisian said, we're not going to rest on these guys that we have. We're going to kick them all to the curb. I mean, 2 years ago, Trey Wisner was one of the top rushers in the SEC. Kicked them all to the curb and said, we're redoing this room. They go get Raleek Brown from Arizona State. They get Hollywood Smothers from NC State, who was heading to Alabama. They swooped in, stole him from Alabama. And I just think Texas, with Cam Coleman, with Arch Manning, Ryan Wingo, all these different pieces they have on offense, if the offense can be more consistent this year, and it's got to start immediately. Obviously, week 2 out of the gates, they get Ohio State coming to Austin. That's a must-win for them. They got to win that one. And I think, look, they're going to trip up and lose an SEC game or two along the way. But I just think Texas, to me, looks like the most complete team coming out of the spring. And I get it. Everybody wants to question, high expectations and all that with Sark. Again, can they live up to it? That's going to be the big question for Texas. Coming in number 2, I did put the Georgia Bulldogs. I do think with their backfield back, yes, Nate Frazier got banged up in the spring game, but it sounds like he's going to be okay. All the different pieces that they have there, I just and led by Gunnar Stockton, who's been so good, for them and doesn't turn the ball over. He's so good with his legs in the red zone. It's all about Georgia up front defensively. How good can they get, getting back to those old Georgia defensive fronts that just wreak havoc and wreck shop? That's going to be the big question for Georgia. Looks like some guys are ready to emerge. We're going to see, again, it was spring ball, not a whole ton to take away there. But if this offense can still be balanced, a nice coordinated balanced attack, and the defense can get back to that aggressive swarming style up front from that front 7, then I'm going to feel really good about Georgia. Again, schedule's tough. It's a tough schedule for the Bulldogs, but I feel like Kirby Smart's team, right now, if we're picking the 2 best teams coming out of the spring, I would lean Texas and Georgia. That brings us to number 3, and that's Ole Miss. And I've had several people tell me they think Ole Miss deserves to be ahead of a Georgia or even a Texas because of what they bring back. And obviously they've got the 2 biggest positions figured out. Trinidad Chambers coming back at quarterback and Kewan Lacey back at running back. 2 dynamic playmakers who seem to get better and better as the year went along, and were a big reason why this team went deep in the playoffs. And, we're basically just a couple plays away from beating Miami and potentially playing for a national championship. Now, it is Pete Golding, and it is a new OC. That's going to be the big question mark with John David Baker taking over. Is Charlie Weiss Jr. ran that offense throughout the playoffs for them when they went on that great run. And yes, Pete Golding got a lot of credit for it, but a lot of that was Charlie Weiss Jr. He's now at LSU. He's the offense coordinator there. So how much does John David Baker change? How much does he keep the same from the system they ran and terminology and all that with Trinidad Chambers? Now, one thing that I think is underrated that we're not talking enough about is the overhauled wide receiver core at Ole Miss. There's a lot of new pieces in that receiving core, and some guys who are maybe a little bit underrated. When you talk about bringing in the Syracuse transfer who is a former 5-star and things like that, like they have some pieces, Jonte Cook and others, but they're going to have to figure out that big C word chemistry. And again, if they can figure that out relatively quickly, then I'll feel good about Ole Miss. But you got Deuce Alexander back, Jonte Cook, Darryl Gill, Horatio Fields, a lot of new pieces coming in through the portal. How quickly do they gel with Trinidad Chambers? That will be the question. But again, Ole Miss still very high on them. But, I think it's fair to question, what does Pete Golding, a full season of Pete Golding, look like as a head coach? This is his first time as a full regular season head coach. So some questions with Ole Miss, but man, they got a lot figured out. I'll tell you this, if they didn't have Chambliss and Lacey back, I think a lot of people would be dropping them down, but I think they got them pretty high for a good reason. Next up, I put Texas A&M at number 4. Yes, they bring back Marcel Reed. Yes, they bring back Mario Craver. Yes, they have a good dynamic run game. They've improved in the trenches, both on offensive and defensive line through the portal. But I have big questions with A&M and the, new OC, new DC. Feel pretty good about what Mike Elko does with the defense, but just kind of curious to see if this offense can be as explosive as they were for much of last season with a new play caller, and what does that look like? They lose Casey Concepcion, obviously. They bring in Horton, the wide receiver from Alabama, but again, it's a tough schedule for A&M. Again, I thought they kind of used it to their advantage, that they had a weaker conference schedule to start last year, and obviously the loss at Texas is what killed them at the end of the season, and then losing the home game in the playoff to Miami. I'm still high on A&M. I still think they're going to be really good. I put them in my top 4, but that's what's kind of keeping me. If they return Colin Klein at OC, I might be pushing for A&M into the top 3 coming out of spring, but that's kind of where I put the Aggies. I'm putting LSU at 5. Man, I went back and forth. I had LSU higher. I had them lower. I just don't know what this team is going to be with Lane Kiffin in year one. Sam Leavitt, obviously his health issues being limited throughout the spring. We're going to have to see, unfortunately, their first game of the season, home game against Clemson, where College game day will be on campus. That's when we'll really get a good feel for what this LSU team is going to be. But I think right now, I just don't know. A whole new wide receiver room. What is this going to look like? A new offensive line. Again, like what they did through the transfer portal, like what they look like on paper. Lane Kiffin, Charlie Weiss Jr., tremendous play caller. Blake Baker back running the defense, great. But I got to see what LSU looks like before I can even assess what they are. We got a little bit of a picture through spring, and that's why I'm going a little bit more optimistic, putting them 5. But we still going to see them in action on the football field before we can really assess what they are. Putting Oklahoma at number 6. Again, if you want to have them a little bit higher, I'm fine with that. John Mateer back. The big thing with Oklahoma is health for John Mateer. If he's fully healthy with all the weapons he's got, Satania back at receiver, the pieces they added through the portal, like Parker Livingston, and then the run game. They have got to find that run game for Oklahoma to be successful this year. But I'm putting Oklahoma 6. Right behind them, I put Alabama at 7. Obviously, the quarterback battle is going to go on between Austin Mack and Keelan Russell. We still think Keelan Russell is going to win that job. But we're going to have to wait and see, how this thing goes out through the spring, and Alabama will open with ECU to start the season. But put Alabama at 7, but it feels weird to put them that low, man. It feels almost disrespectful. It feels like Alabama is going to prove us wrong this year and have a nice season and be a top 4 team when it's all said and done. And then lastly, in the top 8, I'm putting Tennessee there. I went back and forth. Obviously, quarterback battle going on with them. George McIntyre, Faison Brandon, that will go on through the summer months. But the defense is why I'm still high on them. I like what they did, with the pieces they brought in from Penn State, the new DC. And I think Tennessee, look, they always get a benefit of the doubt offensively because of Josh Heupel and what he does. That's why I put Tennessee at number 8. When we return here on Locked On SEC, we will get to our bottom 8 coming out of spring, ranking our top SEC teams. Keep it locked right here. More Locked On SEC. Hey guys, if you've ever opened your bank account and thought, where did all my money go? You're not alone. Keeping track of your subscriptions, spending, and bills can get overwhelming fast. And that's where our friends at Rocket Money come in, helping you take control of your finances all in one place. It tracks all your subscriptions in one spot so you can help cancel the ones you don't need with just a few taps. It automatically categorizes your spending so you can actually see where your money is going, and it's going to help you set budgets, get alerts, and stay on top of those incoming bills. It just makes everything feel more organized and give you a clearer picture of your finances day to day. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that's going to help you find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, help lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. You can join today at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That is rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Hey guys, thank you for making Locked On SEC your first listen of the day. Thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you never miss an episode, you already live your team every day. Now take it up a level. Go ad-free. Join our everydayer club at lockedonsec.supercast.com. Ad-free versions of the show, Discord, channel access, and much more. lockedonsec.supercast.com. All right, continuing the conversation, we've been giving you our post-spring rankings in the SEC. We did our 1 through 8, so now let's run through the back 8. We start with number 9. It is Florida. I'm high on John Summerall. I still think the quarterback thing needs to become a little bit clearer. We did see Tramel Jones Jr. look good in the Florida spring game, but is Aaron Philo going to continue to push him throughout the spring and eventually win that job? If we get a little bit more clarity on that, I love the wide receiver room at Florida. I love Jaden Ball in the backfield. And I do think this defense is going to be a little bit spicier, a little bit more aggressive. John Summerall brought in some pieces through the portal. They brought back a couple of big names on the D-line. I like Florida, and I do think that they are a much better team this year than they were in the last year of Billy Napier. Coming in number 10, again, another team I'm high on, Alex Golesh and Auburn. Want to see it in action. Byron Brown at quarterback, all the USF pieces he brought in. Will it work with an SEC schedule? Time is going to tell on that, but you got to like it. If you're an Auburn fan, at least know that your offense is going to be watchable and more entertaining this year. So I like Auburn as my 10th best team. Coming in number 11 is Mizzou, and I hate to ding them on the Ahmad Hardy injury because it's something they can't control, him getting shot at a concert, but there is unknown there. There's unknown if the SEC's leading rusher is going to be back for Mizzou. I think they'll be okay with Jamal Roberts, but Austin Simmons at quarterback, super talented, but there's just a lot of unknown there with Mizzou. So I ding them a little bit. I move them down a little bit. And particularly, look, let's just say they don't have Ahmad Hardy for half the season or all season. I think Mizzou moves down this list big time. And, despite Eli Drinkwitz getting paid as one of the top highest paid coaches in college football, I'm questioning Mizzou a little bit. Prove me wrong, Mizzou. Coming in number 12 is South Carolina. I just didn't know what to do with South Carolina coming off of the terrible year they had last year. Lenore Sellers, obviously, they go and make a change at OC. I think we all are believing that this offense is going to be much, much better this year. Defense, Dylan Stewart, obviously an absolute stud. But this is the make it or break it year, in my opinion, for Shane Beamer. And I like Shane Beamer a lot. We have him on the show in the past. I just think he's got to prove it this year. They've got to be obviously way better than they were last year, but can they even be in that 8-win, 9-win, potential playoff conversation if all goes well? If Lenore Sellers reaches his peak on what he's supposed to be, possibly, but it's a make or break season. If it's 5 or 7 or worse, I think Shane Beamer is gone. And so that's why I put South Carolina down low. 13, Kentucky. Again, Will Stein's done a phenomenal job in the portal. I just don't know what this team is. We're going to have to see it in action with all the new pieces from quarterbacks to running backs to wide receivers on defense. It's all new. And while I like what they've done, you still got to go out there and prove it on the football field. Look, I was a fan of the Jeff Lebby hire. That's not panned out great for Mississippi State so far. You can be a good head coach or be a good coach in general, but fail as a head coach in the SEC. It's a different animal. And so, I love the connections to Kentucky and all that Will Stein brings, but we're going to have to see what this Kentucky team is. I do think they can be competitive. We'll see what that looks like. I put Vanderbilt down at 14, and the big reason for this is just the Jared Curtis growing pains I think they're going to go through. I think you bring in the 5-star quarterback who's an absolute stud, talent out of this world, huge cannon arm. I just think he's going to go through his ups and downs this year. He's going to have those games where he throws 3 interceptions. He's going to have those games where he fumbles the ball away and they lose in the final minute. I just think they're going to go through those growing pains. And I don't think it's necessarily Vanderbilt coming back down to the bottom of the SEC like everybody thinks that they're going to, and losing Diego Pavia and all that. I just think Clark Lee's done a tremendous job of building up this program. I just think the SEC is loaded. With a true freshman quarterback, it's just going to be really tough for them to win some tough games. So I think they'll be competitive, but I just think Vanderbilt kind of comes back down off their high that they were under with Diego Pavia, and is, you know, probably more of a 6-6, maybe 7-5 type season if all goes well. Coming in number 15 is Arkansas. I just, man, it's tough for me with Ryan Silverfield. Again, seems like a nice guy. You know, the quarterback thing they've got to figure out is a KJ Jackson. You know, the backfield, I think, has a potential to be good. I think the defense, look, we saw in the spring game, they looked much better, but that's against each other. What does the defense look like against some competitive, really good offenses in the SEC? You know, we're going to have to see that in action. But I think it's going to be a tough year for Arkansas. Again, 6-6 would be a step forward, get back to a bowl game, maybe a foundation for building something for the future. I just think it's going to be a really tough year for Arkansas based on what we saw. And then I'm putting Mississippi State at 16. It may not be fair, but I just, and I like Kamario Taylor a lot, man. I start to get the vibes that maybe this isn't the right path for Jeff Lebby, that, you know, maybe he ends up getting fired after this year and he's got to go back and be an OC somewhere else. I just think it's a tough job, man. I mean, Mike Leach did a phenomenal job there. Obviously, Dan Mullen before that, and then struck gold the Dak Prescott thing, but it's just a tough place to win consistently at Mississippi State, and even harder that the SEC top to bottom is even tougher now. I mean, you know, maybe it was easier to win at Mississippi State when Vandy was down and Ole Miss was down and South Carolina was down. Now all those programs are competitive, and so I say it all the time, somebody has to be bad. Somebody has to be the loser and be at the bottom of this conference. And so I'm putting Mississippi State in there. Look, were they way more competitive last year and they beat Arizona State and they should have beaten Texas? They were in that game to the very end. They had plenty of those moments, but do they build off of that? Can they take that step forward this year? I just don't know if the defense has all the pieces that they need to have. And again, they can go prove me wrong, but that is where I have it. So again, to recap, Texas and Georgia at the top of my SEC rankings, followed by Ole Miss, A&M, LSU, Oklahoma, Alabama, Tennessee, Florida, and Auburn in that 7, 8, 9, 10 range. Mizzou, South Carolina, Kentucky, 11, 12, 13. And then the bottom 3, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, and Mississippi State. It was tough. Again, if you disagree, you want to have your rankings differently, I won't fault you for that. But it's tough, man. Look at 1 through 16 and how these teams fare. Now, again, maybe once some quarterback battles are figured out and we get to the start of September, maybe these rankings will change, but that's kind of where I have them, at least coming out of the spring. All right, still more to come here on Locked On SEC, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. All right, a few more topics here I want to hit on before we call the show. We talked earlier this week, guys, about the comments from Steve Sarkisian where he took a shot at Ole Miss and their basket weaving class when talking about Texas holding students accountable for going to class and many times credit hours not transferring with players transferring in. But there was a lot of more good stuff in that Matt Hayes interview with Sark, including Sark's problem with the college football playoff committee. And so I wanted to touch on that a little bit. Here's what he says. Sark has a bigger problem, the selection committee. This goes beyond how the committee promised last season to focus more on strength of schedule, but wound up right back at wins and losses being the determining factor. He said, is the committee actually watching every game of significance every fall Saturday? Not just highlights, but entire games, and then evaluating based on the entirety of the resume. Here's what Sark says. The committee doesn't have the bandwidth to watch that many games. They see the media and the coaches' polls, and they copy them. You've got a 12-team playoff, and that means there are at least 30 teams that impact it. And now all of a sudden you want to go to 24? Now the polls become an even greater factor because now you're asking the committee to watch 40 teams a week, if not 50. He went on to say, I'm a football junkie. When we are not playing, I'm watching Quad Box because it's what I love, but I can't keep up. I don't vote anymore in the coaches poll because it's not fair for me to vote. I couldn't tell you how NC State played against Wake Forest. How could I know? But again, Sark's statement there, 40 or 50 teams in one weekend. Who's watching that many games? Well, I'll tell you, I'm watching every SEC game over the weekend. I've got the multiple TVs and I can watch every SEC game, but yeah, I mean, if time allows or if scheduling, if there's not a great SEC matchup, I'll put on an Ohio State or something like that. But I'm kind of with them. Like it's hard for you to get a good sense on what some of these other teams are. And I'll always say that. I'll go, look, I don't know how good Maryland is. I haven't watched them, but I can give you my perspective on every SEC game. The College Football Playoff Executive Director, Rich Clark, said the committee has access to every game played every weekend as well as previous games. Each committee member has their own iPad and direct access to games to watch whenever they would like. So Rich Clark kind of defending it, saying, I can assure you they watch the games. Now, 6 of the 13-member selection committee, nearly half of them are full-time FBS directors, including the chairman and Arkansas 80 Hunter Yurachek. Then you got Mark D'Antonio, Gus Malzahn, Jeff Tedford, Mike Riley. Are all these guys watching every game? And again, for Hunter Yurachek, if Arkansas's playing a home game, guess what? He's probably on the sidelines, getting his team ready or watching his team. He's not sitting in an office watching all the other games happening. But that brings us back to the strength of schedule, wins versus losses. The selection committee last season had stricter guidelines saying they were going to heighten strength of schedule. It was all part of an unwritten, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours deal between the SEC and the playoff executive committee. This is according to Matt Hayes. He said the SEC, of course, moved to 9 conference games, agreed to a 16-team format, and the committee would use strength of schedule as a significant factor. They even added new strength of schedule metrics to the equation. But we just didn't see that happen. Sark went on to say, everyone talks about NIL, but my biggest gripe is the selection committee. There is no transparency there whatsoever on what exactly the committee is doing. We have got to figure it out. Sark also went on to say, he said, look, I would go back to a 14 playoff and have your own conference playoff to get the 4 teams in. You want more inventory for your TV partners. We have to think outside the box. Just adding teams and going to 24, that's a very spastic view, thinking that's going to solve the problem. Forever in college athletics, we don't think about the unintended consequences on decisions we make. It's all knee-jerk reactions. Look where it has gotten us. So I found those comments very enlightening from Steve Sarkisian. Again, they were kind of overshadowed by the basket weaving comment that people glossed over. But I'm with them. I think the playoff committee has to do a better job in evaluating teams. I still say don't even look at the other rankings. You should every week. I think there should be more drastic movement in the playoff rankings week to week based on what you saw. If you have Alabama at 6 and they played an FCS team, I'd move them down. Even if they won 56-0, you didn't even challenge yourself. You're moving down. If you're, Texas, and you went on the road and you lost to a top 10 opponent, I'm only drop you 1 spot. Heck, I might move you up 2 spots if you played competitively but lost a tough game against a top 5 opponent. That's what needs to be more weighed into this is strength of schedule. And again, strength of opponent, everybody wants to go to who'd you lose to. I always go to who've you beaten. I think 5 top 25 wins should be better than, well, you lost to an unranked opponent. Okay, but who you beaten? That should have more of a heavier factor in weighing all these decisions. A few other notes here. The ACC meetings are going on this week, and a few interesting storylines we heard about yesterday. Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, coming out saying ESPN officials have been pretty clear, quote, that they want the playoff to remain at 12, and if the playoff were to expand, not to go beyond 16 teams. So pretty interesting that the folks who own the broadcast rights to the playoff don't even want to go to 24. They're going, you know what, 12's good, maybe 16 if you twist our arm. So found that kind of interesting. And you wonder, is it even ESPN saying, are we watering down this product? And, they can sell, the thing to advertisers and all that, but does it become a little bit more watered down if you've got all these extra games and do TV ratings hurt? Is it, we're playing 24 teams in the playoff. Some of these playoff games, do we have more James Madison, Oregon, awkward blowouts that people are turning off in the middle of the first quarter? That's another thing to consider. The other thing for Ross Dellinger, he said the Big 12, the ACC, and Notre Dame joining the Big 10 in support of the 24-14 playoff. The SEC must agree for the model to be adopted. Now, Jim Phillips saying, quote, our desire with the coaches and the ADs is 24. He said, when you're leaving national championship contending teams out of the playoff, you don't have the right number. We lived through it. We suffered through Florida State going undefeated and missing when the field was 4. He said, I know other schools have suffered for it. Notre Dame was a playoff-worthy team last year, and you saw what happened to the last team that got invited in with Miami. Jim Phillips' two rationale points for ACC support for the 2014 playoff. He says, one, more access for more deserving teams that are good enough to compete for a national championship, and two, more access to meet increased investment in football programs and rosters. So again, it makes sense. I mean, again, but I've had some people say, like, we're trying to find the national champion, the best team in the country. Is there going to be a year where the 24th team turns out to be the best team in the country? Not likely. So again, more watered down, possibly. Last thing to throw in here, the ACC said they have proposed week 0 as a universal start in FBS beginning in 2027. They said that has to happen. According to Jim Phillips, he said there's too much compression in the system. I looked it up. You guys know week 1 games this year begin on September 3rd. I looked it up. LSU fall classes start on August 24th. Auburn's move-in day is August 16th. Alabama's classes begin on August 19th. I don't see a reason why we can't have week 0 become week 1. I mean, this year it's week 0 is Saturday, August 29th. Last year, week 0 was August 23rd. So it's almost like we got the calendar, we got pushed back or forward a week this year, and everything should be kind of moved back a week if it were to make more sense for scheduling. If you got kids on campus, like, there's no reason why, all these football players are all already on campus in July and August practicing. There's no reason why we can't start the season in what we call week 0. But we will see. Thank you guys for tuning into today's Locked On SEC. Make sure you subscribe and follow so you get all the latest episodes. And if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Just head to lockedonsec.supercast.com. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked On SEC. For those of you on video, saying the first ever national Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel and audio, make sure you make your second listen to Locked On College Football.